We are about to embark upon a series of strange and exciting, dangerous adventures. Adventures that will lead us to all parts of the world.
Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. This time we're looking at Batman number 118. This is from the 2016 series, written by Joshua Williamson, art by Jorge Molina and Mikhail Janin, Tomeu Mori on colors, Clayton Cowles letters, cover by Jorge Molina. Associate editor was Dave Walgos, Ben Abernathy editor. So I quit reading this because of the stupid Future State storyline that was really dumb. And I accidentally bought this one, so I figured we should review it. So Batman breaks up a robbery and goes on to break up some of his rogues gallery from robbing a bunch of rich people. Kind of normal fair Batman stuff, but he doesn't get a chance to relax because it looks like something bad has happened with the Club of Heroes, more recently known as Batman Incorporated. They may have killed a villain known as Abyss, but there's a crazy twist at the end with who's been funding them. And Batman may be teaming up with a cop that dresses like Laura Croft, but it looks pretty interesting. Overall, the story was pretty fun, very fast-paced, lots of action. I like that. No backup story. I like that a lot. It's actual comic length adventure. And the colorist did a great job. There's some really amazing panels in this between the artist and the colorist. They work together very well. I thought the art was pretty solid overall. Not my favorite, but it was definitely serviceable and probably a little beyond that. I think the colorist really brings out the best in this artist, and they should probably work together more often, because if they had a different colorist on this book, the art would significantly suffer for it. So I have to say, I'm gonna check out the next issue. I'm gonna recommend this. Is it worth $5? No, most comics aren't, but I wouldn't have a problem paying $4 for it. And while the cover is not really telling you anything about what's happening in the book, it's just a pinup, pretty well done. It didn't inspire me to buy this. I just bought it on accident thinking that it was Batman 89, so that was just a mess up on my part, but it was a shockingly fun story, and I'm glad Joshua Williamson is on the book and Tynion is no longer on it, because Tynion was just getting boring and caught up in these weird storylines with supporting cast that had nothing to do with anything. They wrote Ghostmaker and Clown Hunter out. Looks like they're off doing who cares what. So I'm glad that story is over with, and this one is now going somewhere more interesting. Yeah, they're taking Batman International to minimize Bruce Wayne's involvement in the comics, it seems, while they push John Ridley's Jace Fox title. But this was a good book, and I'm looking forward to reading the next issue. So I will recommend it. It's overpriced, but it was a good story that's worth reading if you're a Batman fan. That'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future reviews. If you'd like to help the channel out in other ways, links are in the description for my merchandise store and other ways to support me. And as always, we hope to see you on the next one. Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. This time we're looking at Batman issue 119. This is from the Rebirth line, and this is part 2 of The Abyss. Written by Joshua Williamson, art by Jorge Molina and Adriano De Benedetto and Michael Jane. Tomeu Mori was on colors, Clayton Cowles letters, Jorge Molina did the cover, associate editor was Dave Walgos, Ben Abernathy editor. The cover's pretty good actually, at least it's dynamic, so there's something happening. Batman is talking to Lex Luthor, and a team tries to take Batman out. They're Luthor goons, and Batman makes short work of them before escaping. Now, at this point, Lex Luthor does know that Bruce Wayne is Batman, because secret identities are a joke over at DC, and in modern comics in general, so I don't even know why anybody bothers. And Batman has to go examine the body of Abyss, but it looks like the corpse has been dead for months, and that's when he's attacked by Abyss. And things don't go quite well for Batman. Now, there's a backup story, written, drawn, and lettered by Carl Kerschel, colors by John Rausch, edits by Ben Abernathy, and that's this girl Mia trying to figure out what happened to her friend, and she meets Bruce Wayne at a gala and is kind of bored, and she decides to break into her friend's house and try and nose around. So she dresses up like Robin, goes in there only to find a bunch of cucumbers laying around, and Batman waiting to talk to her. So he puts her in his car to take her home, and that's when they come across these little bug-eyed alien things, and it looks like Batman might be in some trouble, but don't worry, this this 10-year-old little girl is gonna save him. The art on the first story is pretty solid. It does use the anime action lines, and when there's soft lighting, like there's a scene where Bruce and Lex are sitting down, it really does kind of bring out the flaws in some of the art, especially with faces. There's a bit of proportionality issues. I also don't like the use of the anime action lines. That really annoys me. It's lazy and it's not always used appropriately. But the shots of Batman in costume are by and large very, very good, and the scenes at night are really good. So I'd have to say the art is pretty decent overall. Not the greatest, but it's definitely not the worst. The backup story has horrible art, awful coloring. It looks very much like a bad European advertisement. I hated everything about it. People are very disproportionate, very weird looking, except Batman when he's in costume looks really good. Everything else I was not that impressed with. The story is okay. It just was aimed at a much younger audience than the main story, so it doesn't really flow very well. The backup story reads like it's aimed at middle schoolers, where the primary story is much more gruesome and dark and aimed at like high schoolers, I would say. So those two things don't really make sense together. It's almost like the backup story was intended to be a one-shot that was broken apart into multiple chapters for the service of making it a backup story, and it really doesn't work at all. My other major complaint is that the character Abyss, when he's referred to in the plural, is constantly given an apostrophe S. Grammar lesson from 3rd grade, anything ending in S just gets an apostrophe. You don't add another S onto it, and it's done throughout the book. What are your editors doing? You had two people, the associate editor and the editor, working on this book, and nobody caught that? Are you kidding me? Abyss is an apostrophe. You don't have to put apostrophe S on it. That is just incredibly lazy. I don't know how they let that go through the entire issue. It's really, really frustrating. But otherwise, it was an okay issue. Is it worth $5? No. Grab this out of a $1 or $2 bin, and it'll hold up for that. The story is fine. The art is largely decent. There's a few things that annoyed me that are obviously anime and manga inspired, but the backup story is garbage. The backup stories in these Batman books have been total trash since they started doing them, and I don't know why they even bother. Just add more story for the primary. Stop with the lazy secondary stories that are really misplaced in these books. So I will recommend it, but only if you can get it cheap or buy the trade really cheap. It's not the greatest Batman story, but it's definitely not the worst either, and it is compelling enough that I would like to read the next installment. Just certain flaws are very distracting. Mostly the action lines and the weird manga faces that people make when they're shocked. Everybody's got these exaggerated wide mouths, and it's very frustrating. Either make it anime manga style or make it Western style. This hybrid just looks awful more often than not. At least this artist is doing a good job with Batman in costume and the dark scenes. They're better than most, but it's still very frustrating to see these weird action lines where they're not needed. That's gonna do it for this one. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future reviews. If you'd like to help the channel out in other ways, links are in the description to various support methods, and as always, we hope to see you on the next one. Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. This time we're looking at Batman issue 120. This is from the Rebirth line from DC Comics, and this is part 3 of The Abyss, written by Joshua Williamson, art by Jorge Molina and Mikhail Janin. Tomeu Mori did the colors, Clayton Cowles letters, Jorge Molina did the cover, Dave Walgo's associate editor, Ben Abernathy editor. Cover's good. It does have a sense of dynamics to it, and it does relate to what's going on in the book. So Batman's been injured, and Abyss is at fault for that, and Abyss goes after Lex Luthor as well. Luthor has this prototype armor which is similar to his old green armor from the 80s, but it's got a big Batman logo on it. Meanwhile, Batman needed some help to escape the police, and thankfully one of the detectives is willing to help. He decides he's going to go in and try and bust out the Batman Incorporated guys, but they don't seem that keen on helping him. In fact, they do quite the opposite and attack him immediately. I was a little disappointed with that because it seems out of character for these guys. They were very heroic characters before, and now they seem to have possibly switched sides. And it looks like Lex Luthor and Batman may be teaming up. The backup story is a continuation from last issue called They Make Great Pets. Story, art, and letters by Carl Kerschel. Colors by Dave McKeag. Edits by Ben Abernathy. Batman is fighting some kappa in the sewer system, it looks like, underwater. And Mia is trying to relay information to him, and she decides to go help him because because she's backup. She does end up helping him a little bit, but we are left with a cliffhanger ending. The art in the main story is definitely superior to the art in the backup story. It's decent art. It's a lot better than last issue with fewer flaws, and the Batman ink guys look really good, so that was cool. And the story was actually pretty interesting. This is a better installment than last issue, but the backup story still is very much a lesser story in a lot of respects. It's definitely aimed at a younger audience, and it doesn't mesh with the darker themes of the primary story. So you've got a story that's aimed at middle school students in with a story that's aimed at an older age demographic, and they just don't mesh. They're hitting two totally different age demographics, and I really hate the art and coloring in the backup story. It's very cartoony, very anime manga inspired, and it really is annoying. Batman looks good in there, but the rest of the art is a little too cartoonish and hokey for me. So I'll recommend this, but only at a lower price. At $5 it was overpriced. You pick it up for $1 or $2, it'll be worth it. I would say, honestly, wait till the trade paperback comes out and collects the main story, because that is a much better way to read this one, and you'll probably be able to find it cheaper than you would the back issues anyway, unless you can find them for $1 or $2. So an interesting read, but not worth the cover price of $5, so don't pay anywhere near that for it. It's just not worth it. And as usual, the backup stories are a disappointment. That's gonna do it for this one. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future reviews. If you'd like to help the channel out in other ways, links are in the description to various support methods, and as always, we hope to see you on the next one. Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. This time we're looking at Batman issue 121. This is the final installment of the Abyss storyline, written by Joshua Williamson, art by Jorge Molina and Mikhail Janin, colors by Tomeu Mori, letters by Clayton Cowles, cover by Jorge Molina. Now Lex Luthor and Batman have had to team up. It appears to be that the Batmen have turned against Batman and are siding with Abyss, but things aren't exactly what they seem, and it looks like Lex Luthor may have had a hand in Abyss's creation. It looks like Batman Inc. may not be necessarily against Batman, but we're left with a pretty unsatisfying ending that appears to be leading into Shadow War Alpha, and I really don't have a whole lot of interest in that because it looks like Ghostmaker and Clown Hunter are returning, as well as Prometheus. Then there's the backup story with They Make Great Pets, story, art, and letters by Carl Kerschel, colors by Dave McKeag, edited by Ben Abernathy, and Mia and Batman are wrapping up their little adventure together, but Mia's not done getting herself in trouble just yet because there is one more Kappa that they have to deal with. And of course we're left with a kind of wholesome ending. It's really lame. The storyline just doesn't fit with the main book. The main story is much darker than this backup. The backup is clearly written at a younger audience level and probably should have been a one-shot instead. That's the problem I have with all these serialized backups. They're better off as one-shot stories in single issues under like a Tales of or Legends of the Dark Knight kind of thing than they are as these really disjointed backup stories that often don't fit the tone of the main story. And that's been kind of a problem with DC for a very long time. The main story ended up being a bit hokey and forced, and it used some cliches that I would expect more out of a cartoon, a really boring little kid cartoon that really just didn't fit the narrative. This was a very weak finale. There were some interesting ideas here, but it looked like this issue probably was one of those, alright, you need to wrap up the storyline issues, because it seems so forced and ham-fisted with the way it ended. It could have been a much better ending if it had had more space to do the big reveals, instead of the way it was handled, which the cover, while done pretty well, is a giant lie because Ghostmaker's only in this for like 2 panels. And that's at the very end of the book, when they're setting up the Shadow War. So I thought that was a bit of a lie. But again, the main story was really weak as an ending. I was really enjoying the storyline up until this point, but it just fell flat on its face. It looked like it was forced and rushed. They were trying to wrap it up an issue earlier than it probably should have been. And there's references to things that you have no idea what they're talking about. Like Batman has to leave suddenly at the end of the issue, and it references you to a Detective Comics issue, but then it immediately jumps into the epilogue where they're setting up the Shadow War, and they don't give you enough to work with for either of those storylines. And this entire issue just was really rushed and had that same problem. It really looked like like it was just thrown together at the last minute. I have a hard time recommending this story arc. It was pretty terrible ending for what was actually not too bad of a story otherwise. But there were some decent action scenes. The art's okay. The backup story again is completely different than the main story, so it just doesn't fit in. So if this is something you're interested in, grab it out of a discount bin because I don't see this being worth much, or buy the trade really, really cheap. That's gonna do it for this one. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future reviews. If you'd like to help the channel out in other ways, links are in the description to various support methods. And as always, we hope to see you on the next one. Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. This time we're looking at Batman issue 124. This is from the Rebirth line from DC Comics, and this story is called Abyss Finale, which is very similar to issue 121, which was called The Abyss Finale. So I guess there's two finales? I don't know. This is written by Joshua Williamson, art by Howard Porter and Jorge Fornes. Tomeu Mori did the colors, Clayton Cowles letters, Jorge Molina did the cover, associate editor Dave Walgos, Ben Abernathy editor. Backup story about Poison Ivy is written by G. Willow Wilson, art by Danny, colors by Trish Mulville, letters by Hassan Atsmain Elahu, assistant editor Jessica Burby, edited by Amedo Totoro, Ben Abernathy group editor. So the primary story finds Abyss apparently back stomping around, but it's not the Abyss we saw previously. It is in fact somebody else, and Batman is there to stop her, but she is there to try and find out what happened to her parents, and she gets some good leads. Her parents were, of course, community organizers, because that's what you have to be in comics these days, I guess. They went missing, and Batman relays how he had the opportunity to kill Joe Chill. He's not named, but that's who it is. When he was arrested and in jail, but he didn't do it because he didn't want to be the same type of person Chill was. And that's an interesting flashback sequence. That was actually pretty well done. So he leaves Abyss to make her own decision about what to do with her parents' killer, and gives her the opportunity to join Batman Inc. It's an okay story. I didn't hate it. It doesn't have a whole lot to do with Abyss. It's just sort of tangentially related to that storyline and does set up the character to return as this new person. The art is pretty solid, actually. I wasn't too upset with it. Howard Porter can be a bit hit and miss sometimes, but I thought overall the art wasn't bad. I didn't hate it. It was serviceable for sure. And the cover of the issue isn't bad either, but it's just a pinup. It tells you nothing about the issue or the story, so that's kind of annoying. But the Poison Ivy story is a complete waste of space. Poison Ivy apparently had to get two sides of her personality merged in Fear State. That's at least footnoted in here. That was nice. And she spent some time talking to the gardener, which I didn't care about because that character's stupid. And then we jump forward and she's in the desert trying to get her powers back, and she makes a little friend, and then it leads into Poison Ivy issue 1. I didn't care about that story at all. It was pointless talking that did nothing for me and could have been better summed up in 2 pages at the beginning of Poison Ivy issue 1. It was a long way to get somewhere that didn't need to take that long. Could have been done in flashback. So I wasn't real impressed with the backup story. The main story is a good standalone, especially if you read the Abyss storyline, but you don't even need to have read that to appreciate what they were telling you in that one. So I would say get it out of a bargain bin for a couple bucks. I don't know if this story will be included in the trade paperback version of the Abyss storyline. It probably should be, but I don't know if it's going to be in there. It was a decent enough story, good standalone, and it's leading into Chip Zdarsky's run without actually having to have plot points that drag you into that kicking and screaming. So I didn't mind reading it. I just don't think it's worth the $5 cover price, especially because the backup story is absolutely pointless and boring. So if you get a chance to pick this up, I would say pay less than cover price for it. Don't pay more than $1 or $2. It's really not worth it, but it is a good standalone single issue, minus that horribly pointless Poison Ivy story. That's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future reviews. If you'd like to help the channel out in other ways, links are in the description to various support methods. And as always, we hope to see you on the next one.